So it's been like around 3 weeks since we first posted a video about this router here. We set it up, unboxed it. No, actually we unboxed it first, then set it up. And we also show you how to do it because, you know, we already know how the router works and whatnot. It doesn't differ that much. But we learned a few things since we posted that first video. And the first thing is firmware difference. So when we posted that video, a lot of you guys commented down in the comment section below saying that you guys bought it from China and the firmware interface and the entire setup process is totally different. So that is something that I cannot help you with because our version is the localized Malaysian version. So I'm not sure about the China version. Probably you can still set it up, just that in a more manual way compared to all of the built-in VLAN ID and whatnot. And speaking of VLAN ID, the second point, if you're using Time Internet here in Malaysia, you don't have to set up the VLAN, just connect it. It works, as told by one of our commenters. Thank you. And thirdly is the naming scheme. So I don't know what Huawei is thinking. This router that we have here, the AX3 quad-core, as stated on the box, is actually the Wi-Fi AX3 Pro Edition. So they are both the same thing, just with a different name. And if you are getting the non-Pro version, is the dual-core version actually. I'm not sure if that's gonna be available here in Malaysia, but as of now, this is what we have. So now for the whole review of this router itself, I'm gonna start off by saying that this router is only priced at 299 ringgit. Remember this, 299 ringgit, and we need to put that in our minds because we're gonna need that later. This router is a dual band router and it only works with a single 2.4 GHz network and another single 5.0 GHz network. There's also a guest network, but we'll talk about that later. And then we did do a speed test right here because a lot of you have been asking about speed test and why we didn't just do it in the first video. It's not that simple, and the way that we tested this router's speed is very similar to what I did last year when I first talked about Wi-Fi 6 speeds, which you can check it out at the top right corner there. So what we did here is take a laptop, connect it to the router via Gigabit Ethernet, that means via cable, and then we connected a phone to this router right here using Wi-Fi 6. So we actually tested with two phones, one the Samsung Galaxy S10 Plus, which we also used it last year, and the brand new Poco F2 Pro. Why we chose the Poco F2 Pro? Well, no particular reason, it's just happened to be in our hands and it also has Wi-Fi 6. And it also goes to show that there is a difference in how the Wi-Fi chip works. So Samsung's Exynos will work differently than Snapdragon 865, so do keep that in mind when it comes to speed differences and whatnot. For the 2.4 GHz speeds, you can see right here in the charts, it's actually performing more or less the same as last year. Nothing spectacular, but of course Wi-Fi 6 2.4 GHz is much faster and better than Wi-Fi 802.11n 2.4 GHz because remember Wi-Fi 5 does not have 2.4 GHz, which is AC. And when you compare the Huawei Wi-Fi AX3's Wi-Fi 5 GHz Wi-Fi 6 network with the previous AC generation, it actually performs very well. As far as I can see here, I can reach beyond the 3-digit mark. So I get beyond 100 megabytes per second, megabytes, not megabits, which is just fantastic. It's phenomenal to see a Wi-Fi to be performing with such great speeds. And if you're using something like the Time 1 gigabit internet, you can utilize most of it through Wi-Fi alone, which I think is magnificent. And do keep in mind that we are sitting beside the router while we are testing this. And speaking of sitting right beside the router, now comes the Wi-Fi coverage part, which is kind of weird because Huawei prioritized the 5 GHz network. So what we mean by that is that when you open up Wi-Fi Analyzer apps or anything, even though I'm sitting right beside the router, it's always the 5 GHz network that's more powerful than the 2.4 GHz network. I'm not too sure why. Maybe Huawei just want to prioritize speed over everything else. And that goes to show, actually it works in tandem with one of the other behavior that Huawei has, which is to aggregate both networks together. So if you aggregated these two networks together, you won't realize the difference between the network strength of the 5 GHz and 2.4 GHz networks. Because when you connect it once, The router will dictate which network that you are supposed to be connected to and which one suits you the best. But in this case, the Wi-Fi dictates that you will be getting 5 GHz whenever possible, and the 2.4 GHz will be a second thought. And as for the coverage, I would say this router does a pretty typical job when compared to many other routers that we've used. So when we go inside the studio itself, the 5 GHz network will literally dip quite a lot in terms of signal strength, whereas the 2.4 GHz network will still survive. And when we go downstairs from our office here, the 5 GHz network just dies. It's pretty typical. It's a very common situation when 5 GHz network go through like a layer of 2 or concrete, then it will just straight up die. And the 2.4 GHz still survives for quite a far distance from our current position here, which is also very typical. So I'd say it's performing okay in terms of the coverage. And in our first video, we also said that there's some sort of a rocket icon there on the app itself where you can press, and then supposedly it's supposed to do some sort of speed test for you. Actually, it's not. It's supposed to just change your Wi-Fi channel. So what this means is that when you press the button, it will let you know that you can select a better Wi-Fi channel, and then it will automatically switch to that. So it will provide less interference and probably better stability, because 2.4 GHz networks are in use with many other products right now. Bluetooth, other dongles, other Wi-Fi networks, and just basically anything wireless, because 2.4 GHz is an open network spectrum. So one thing that I think it's weird is that Huawei will dictate the channel for you. You cannot change the channel by yourself, which I don't understand why. It does make it a lot easier for other people to change between Wi-Fi channels by just tapping the button on their app. But for me, who likes to change things manually sometimes, I'm not sure what to feel about this. And for advanced users, I think most of your use cases will be covered by this router. When I say most, it means literally not everything, because there are some weird things that goes on with this router. So, okay, let me go through my notes here. So in the web interface, you can log in via your laptop or even your phone, of course, but there is no multi-user login, so there's just one admin account and one password. That's it. And then inside the menu here, it's actually pretty clean. I like it a lot by the looks of it. And you can configure DDNS, VPN, and UPnP. Mind you, there is no USB plug here, so even if you enable UPnP, you still need another host server to serve you the media files. And then one more thing that I want to talk about is the user management or device management in the interface itself. It's very well built, so you can see what devices connected to which SSID, and then you can limit the bandwidth that each device gets, and also to straight up block them from internet access per device, which I think is a neat thing to have. But maybe if you have more complicated list of SSIDs to manage all your devices, then I'd say the list might get a bit complicated. However, there is one feature that I'm kind of having an issue with, that is the NFC here. They call it the one-hop connect. And since we are using separated networks from between the 2.4 and 5 GHz, and we also have guest network because a lot of people come into office for meetings and whatnot, you cannot configure this NFC to whichever SSID you want it to connect to. So for example, the main purpose that we want to use the NFC is for guests to come in, tap their phones here, and then they straight away connect to our guest network. But it doesn't go that way. For some reason, Huawei hard-locked it to only connect to the 2.4 GHz network. And I think that kind of defeats the purpose of the convenience of having the NFC tag here. But for our use case, I think Huawei could have improved this. Maybe in the next firmware version update, just let us configure the NFC tag, please. And one more weird thing about this router here is that you can find the menu to manually update the firmware of this router. However, I cannot find where to download any of the firmware, even on Huawei's own website. I scoured across the internet, there's just no firmware update files that you can download for this router. So what that means is that OpenWRT or DDWRT, they don't offer any firmware for this router. So tinkerers might want to stay away from this router for now until further updates. So in conclusion, we have to once again take out what we put in our minds from the beginning, the price of 299 ringgit, and evaluate this router once again. Of course, there are some drawbacks like the 3 gigabit Ethernet ports at the back, which I think is just not sufficient for power users. But if you are only using it as a Wi-Fi router, Wi-Fi, like your phones, your laptops, and you're not going to connect your Ethernet, or at least just not up to 4 devices or more, then I think, yeah, 299 ringgit is a really good price to pay for the performance that you get. And you can also invest in more Wi-Fi AX3 routers, and then you can just link them up in a mesh network because it does support that as well. Okay, so do I recommend you to buy this router? If you're still using the provided router from your ISP, like the stupid NetEase router that we are using for some time right now, throw that away, get this router. This is a lot better than that trash. And also one more thing is that if you're coming in from a very, how do you say this? A mid-range to a high-end AC router, maybe this is not for you because you still need your devices like this to be able to connect via Wi-Fi 6 as well. But then again, if you're just looking to upgrade from your usual trash ISP router, this is a good deal. So that concludes our review of the Huawei Wi-Fi AX3 Pro quad-core. Yeah, I think that's a more appropriate name for this router. But okay, anyway, if you have any questions, leave them down in the comment section below. We'll try to answer you whenever we can. I know that there are just kind of a lot of settings in this router, so we'll try to help you out whenever we can. And we'll see you in the next video. Goodbye. See you.